What sends you into orbit? Sometimes comfort problems aren't really about the thermostat. Hot spots, cold spots, poor airflow, humidity issues, and aging equipment can leave everyone feeling frustrated. As the husband and wife-owned company, trust us, we get it. Whatever sends you into orbit, make sure your home's comfort isn't one of them. Schedule your tune-up and home evaluation with LCS Heating and Cooling today. Go to lcsheatingandcooling.com.
Outside the Forecast on WTHR Plus is sponsored by LCS Heating and Cooling.
We appreciate you tuning in to Outside the Forecast. We're going to be on location today here at the National Weather Service office in Indianapolis. A couple of weeks removed from a historic weather event, or we should say events, if you will, here in our state. And before we kind of get into some of the numbers, we certainly want to send our condolences to the family and friends of the 7 Hoosiers lost their lives in this, and the thousands of homes and businesses that were impacted in a historic event. Joined by senior forecaster here, Mike Ryan. Sure. Mike, you and I have been in this industry, so to speak, nearly about the same, almost 30 years.
Yep.
You spent near 20 here, if I'm correct. Partner, I got to tell you, we've had some time to kind of soak up what happened. A high-end event that, is going to, in my opinion, goes down in historical perspectives as one of the bigger that we've had.
Absolutely, Sean. Historic event, as you mentioned, I've worked 27 years in the Weather Service here in the Eastern Midwest, 17 here in Indianapolis. Worst flooding event I have worked in my career. And I think what made it historic, obviously the rivers, and the White River in particular, reaching levels that either we had never seen before, or we had not seen in over 100 years. And March 1913 is always used as the benchmark. And we exceeded that in a number of points in Hamilton and Marion counties. But I think also the length of the event. For Hoosiers that have been around, lived here in the area over the last 20 years, 2008 is probably their benchmark event. We had the significant, severe flooding down in Columbus, I think east of Bloomington, those areas. That was a lot of rain, but it was confined to one day, essentially, 24-hour period. While we had the rain that fell on Tuesday night, the 11th, and Wednesday, the 12th, being the primary impetus for what kick-started this flood event, we had continued rounds of thunderstorms that lasted for several days after. And I think that's also what makes it kind of historic, the longevity of the event.
Well, I mean, I said this on the air, too, a couple of days after. The derecho could have been a state big event for the year. The flash flooding the morning of, the 12th.
Yep.
Could have been a standalone.
Yep.
And then the White River flooding, historic.
Yep.
Could have also been a standalone event for the entire year, and we crammed them into less than a week.
Yep.
I think that stands out. Let's get into the morning of the 12th from a meteorological perspective, from your eyes, how the thing unfolded.
Well, I'll step back to the 11th because that's really when things started. You're right. We had the derecho that moved across the northern part of the state. Worst hit areas were downstream of Chicago, so Lake Porter counties. That was where 100-mile-per-hour winds, lots of power outages, lots of damages. That complex, if you recall, did come down in a more weakened state. It was still severe, but it came down through the area on the afternoon of the 11th, produced, I think, anywhere from 1 to 3 inches of rain for most. And then we kind of had a brief lull Tuesday evening, but we had seen some signs based on how things were evolving. There was a boundary that was kind of hung up in the area to the northeast of Indianapolis, and we had an increase in what we call a low-level jet. It's winds at about 5,000 feet off the ground, and that was pumping in additional moisture, warm, moist air into the area. And because that boundary didn't move, it ended up generating thunderstorms along it that kept moving across the same area. And we started to see that develop after midnight going into the 12th, 1, 2 a.m. And those initial hard-hit areas were east of Kokomo, especially as you went across the northern half of Madison County, down through Muncie, Newcastle, and then down towards the Connorsville, Rushville areas. And those areas received continuous heavy rainfall for, in some cases, 10, 11 hours that lasted into the day on Wednesday. And we had 8, 9, 10 inches that fell in a couple of spots right in that zone over that time period. That's an excessive amount of rainfall to begin with. Then as the additional storms developed during the day and came down into the Indianapolis area and other areas, it just added to the rainfall. And really that was the starting point. I mean, in some cases you had some areas that on that day into the following day were receiving a quarter of the annual rainfall they receive.
Yeah.
That's a lot of water in a short amount of time, and it all fell into the headwaters of the White River.
Yeah, that was it, because
Yeah.
I know some folks are like, well, hey, we were getting questions. What about Fall Creek? And so it was all about which basin it was going to be impacted here. And so, and not hyperbole to say for some areas, a 500 or 1,000 year event. I think an easier way to mentally get that is in any given year, you have a 0.1% chance.
Right.
So a very, very rare situation.
Exceptionally rare. And as we mentioned, obviously the focus for most of your viewers is the White River because of the way that tracks and comes down through Indianapolis. The Whitewater was the other river that was impacted. And of course, that's eastern Indiana. And Franklin and Fayette counties in particular really, really took it hard as that went down. And then, of course, from Muncie going downstream through Anderson to Noblesville and into the Indianapolis area along the White. It took a little bit of time for that crust to work down, obviously. Crust moved through Muncie early on Thursday the 13th, but it didn't come all the way through Indianapolis until Saturday the 15th. And obviously that's when we saw the devastating flooding in Ravenswood, Rocky Ripple, those areas.
At what point here in the office, because I mean, again, you wake up Wednesday morning to the flash flooding that is just absolutely horrific that's going on. At what point after Wednesday morning do you then realize, we are going to have a massive situation along the White River?
Well, I think obviously with the amount of rainfall that we saw, we knew that we were going to have water problems on the White as the week went on. Initially, we talk about flash flood warnings. The highest level of flash flood warning is a flash flood emergency. We save those for the rarest of events where we are concerned about life-threatening immediate flash flooding. We had never issued a flash flood emergency in our coverage area here at the Indianapolis office, and we issued several that day. And it was right in that zone, Madison, Delaware, Henry, because we were that concerned with the reports that we were receiving and with the amount of rainfall that fell. Obviously, though, as we went along, the Ohio River Forecast Center, which is over in Wilmington, Ohio, their responsibility is the forecasting of river levels using their model data with rainfall to kind of predict what the rivers are going to do. And they're doing that a couple times a day. They're in contact with our service hydrologist here. So even on Wednesday morning, we knew that there were going to be some substantial rises on the White River. I think as the day went on and certainly into Thursday, it became apparent that we were probably looking at levels that were either near record or that we had never seen, particularly at Anderson's. It turned out it ended up being above record and setting a new record. And then obviously, as it went downstream from there, kind of ticked up. And some of the impacts with that is what occurs downstream, or excuse me, what occurs upstream impacts the amount of water you're going to see as it comes downstream. Other creeks bringing their water into the White. And that led to the step-up approach through Friday and Saturday as it became apparent that levels were going to be near record even into Marion County.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I love and I hate at the same time, because the flood impacts, when you go on the hydro site, you can click on a gauge and it'll tell you those impacts. And I think as I look back at the event, none of us, and no one in Indianapolis Metro had ever lived through 19, sadly those people are so you don't have that. I worked Labor Day morning 2003. I have a gauge, a memory of that. I know with that particular, but I don't have a gauge. Even if you read those impact statements, I just wonder psychologically for the people if it was difficult for them to really have a true grasp, despite the messaging of what the heck was about to happen.
Well, and that's a good point, because we were dealing with levels that no one had ever seen. They either occurred back in 1913 or they had never occurred in the time that we had those gauges. And a lot of that data goes back into the late 1800s, early 1900s. So nobody had experienced anything like this. And I think that made it difficult. But that also comes back to what we're talking about with the impact statements. We have the impact statements, but once you get above those levels, we're seeing impacts that we've never seen. And the other point is, I mean, those impact statements work very well, but also, if we go back to 1913, the land, how it's built out, it's completely different.
Good point,
And so, you know, I think one thing, you know, obviously, this was a devastating event, but if there's a positive, at least from the hydro side, that's going to come out of this, is we will be able to take all this data in the coming months and develop more detailed impact statements at some of the levels based on what we saw, have new impact statements for those higher levels in case, God forbid, it ever gets back to that level again. We, you know, certainly hope not. But I think that's going to provide additional info for our partners, for the citizens, on what to expect when we reach certain levels on the rivers at various points.
I'm curious too about your staff too, because I know, I mean, listen, it was a heavy event.
Yeah.
I mean, it really was. You know, how psychologically for you and your crew.
Yeah.
Run us through that. How that, you know, it's just heavy when you know that you're doing your best to get this forecast out, and you know what's coming down the road. Yeah.
Rough. I mean, you know, folks don't always think about us because, you know, we're not on TV and visible like you all are, and there's a human element to it. Yeah, we are servants. Service is in our name, and so our folks answered the call, you know, whether it be working at different times, working overtime, working in different locations to get the mission accomplished. But that does take a toll. It takes a toll mentally, it takes a toll physically, and it takes a toll emotionally, because you know that your forecasts and the information that you are providing to partners that is in turn going out to the citizens, you know, that's substantial, because property's being impacted, lives are being impacted, and so it's absolutely, you feel that. And I think now we've been able to catch our breath a little bit now that the weather's settled down. But yeah, it was exhausting, and it's been an exhausting weather year, period. You know, we went through a lot of severe weather in June, where it was the same thing. You know, our staff answers the call, they do what they need to, get out, accomplish things. That's our job. And most importantly, I think what's great, and we've had this for many, many years, but we've really enhanced some of the relationships we have with our county emergency managers and the state. And they're really the front line for getting that information, along with you folks, out to the public. So if we can give them the information they need in the manner they need it, and that's the whole point, tailored information, then they can make decisions more quickly, whether it comes to evacuations or, you know, where they put resources, things like that. I mean, we coordinated quite a bit with state partners, you know, Department of Transportation, Department of Homeland Security, about pre-positioning, you know, where can we pre-position sandbags with the anticipation of this river crest coming down. And that's where we can help them to help the Hoosiers that were impacted.
Well, I think the fascinating thing about all of this is that there's a, you know, this is a data business.
Yes.
You know, and the amount of data that the crews will be able to have to put into the modeling, the flood and inundation maps, and the impact statements going forward is just plentiful.
That's going to help, and I mean it's going to allow us, not that we weren't prepared, we were prepared for this, but it's going to allow us to be even better prepared, a little bit more detail, and, you know, educating our partners on that so that they are better prepared as well. Because, you know, I think when we look back on it, 7 lives that were lost here in the state, tragic, but considering the extent of the event and the historic nature of the flooding, it's really a testament, I think, to all the services that all the agencies provided, you guys and everything, that we only lost 7. 7 is too many, but it could have been worse.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed, my friend. We always appreciate the time.
Thank you, Sean. Appreciate you guys.
Very commendable, and I think I speak for everyone when I say if we never have a tornado over the remainder of the year and we don't see a flood like this for another 113 years, that'll be too soon.
Yeah.
So let's all catch our breath here and let's have some quieter weather times as we move forward. Thanks again for tuning into this edition of Outside the Forecast here on the WTHR streaming channel.